Okay, so what I'm going to do in this tutorial is work through the sort of things that I did for the static tutorial, which should be linked at the bottom of this video. Just to go through some of the tools I'm going to, first I'll just talk about what I've done so far. I've cut out my template and drew on where I'm going to press in the shape and stuck bits of it down, because what's going to happen is the foam is going to warp and ever so slightly change shape. But the thing that you've got to try and preserve most is this nice straight line here, because that's where the zip is going to go. So what I'm going to do is just go through the motions of pinning this down in this spot here, and I'll just go through some of the tools that I'm going to use. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we need lots of pins to do this, because it's essentially the pins that hold the foam in place and allow the latex to then dry and hold everything in place from that point. So in here is about 500 or 600 pins. Each piece uses approximately 200 or 300 pins, so you'll want to carry on doing stuff whilst another piece is drying. So it's a good idea to have lots of them. They're just standard dress making pins, but the most important part is the head, because that's what goes into the foam and holds things in place. So try and get ones that have got a decent head on them, but I would avoid using the ones that have like got a round bit of plastic on the top, because then that means that you'll have lots of little indents, probably more than what you'd want left in your foam once the latex has dried. Okay, so we've also got a couple of thimbles to push the pins in, and it also helps to stop your fingers from becoming completely clogged up with drying latex. We've got a pen which I may or may not be using to push the pins in deeper, and this broader clip, which I also use for the same kind of thing, to push the latex into the foam so that it sets deep and holds a nice deep shape. I've got an applicator, which is just a clay modeling tool, which I'm just going to use to apply the latex. You can use anything, but it's best if it's not porous, because I've used old paint brushes and such, and that didn't work out well. So it's best to have something like this that the latex can just run on and off. Okay, so there's also a board which is what we push the pins through into, and all that this board is there's a waterproof top on, which in the case of this is a cheap piece of polyvinyl chloride leather effect sort of stuff, and under here is 1.5 or 4 or 5 centimeter foam, and what happens is you push the pin down in to that, and the foam will actually bite against the steel of the pin and hold it in place. So you push a pin down and the foam grabs hold of it and keeps it there, and then once the latex is dry, you take out the pin and the foam stays to where the pin pushed it. Okay, so obviously you're pinning this to the board, so wherever you start from is where it will stay. So if you're going to have a couple of pieces on the go, make sure that all of your pieces are going to fit. Okay, so I will get started, and I'm going to fix the left hand side of the chest here. So once it's pinned, it'll be stuck here, so I won't be able to rotate it, but you'll get to see all of the detail work going around all of this from the earlier static tutorial that I prepared just using photographs from when I made the right hand side of the chest. Okay, so what we've got here is pectorals, abdominals, intercostals. They're kind of the only muscles that will really show through the outfit once it's done. So that's why there's not more detail marked in here. For example, you could have sort of muscle striations in here to like define between the upper and lower pec, but once the spandex and your costume is on, you won't get to see that level of detail anyway, so there's kind of no point in having it there. So I'll start. Obviously we're using just standard latex straight out of the tub, and we're kind of using latex like an adhesive, because once it's dry and it's in all of the small holes in the foam, it'll hold the foam in that shape. So we're not really using the latex to mold, we're kind of using it as a glue or some kind of resin to hold it. Okay, so I'm going to start, and all that I'm going to do at first is I am going to just coat this edge in latex, and all I'm doing here is using this applicator and dipping it in and then just scrubbing it roughly along the edge of the foam. I'm not applying any pressure yet, because what's going to be happening is I'll scrub on the latex, and then it'll, once I press it down, that's when it'll sort of squidge through all of the other through the bits that are being pressed down, which then once it's dry, that's what gives it the bond. So I'll just carry on with this. Okay, so we're not putting on too much, we're just covering the edge. Now it'll take a couple of minutes to pin this, so we're only covering the edges in glue in sections to try and find the best kind of balance between giving us time to work with it and it drying too soon. And all that I'm going to do now is just give it a very quick blast with the hair dryer. Now all I'm doing here is I'm just starting the latex off drying, so that when I push down the foam, it will dry more on the foam than on the thing it's being pushed down on, and it also means that the bond of the pin once it's in is stronger. So just give it a very quick blast there. Okay, and now we start to push in the pins. So it's always good to get out some pins in advance. And what I'm going to do now is start to push the foam down into shape, and and then pin it. So I'm going to press it down and push in a pin, and then press that down with the thimble. Now what you should hopefully be able to hear is that which is the steel of the pin rubbing against the foam and the latex, which when that happens, that usually means that the pin is going to stay on the surface of the foam and not get pushed into the foam, because you want the head of each pin to pull the foam down to the level and shape that you want, and when it squeaks, that means that that's going to happen and that your latex isn't too wet. Okay, so I'm just going to go down this edge and pin it in place. One thing that you have got to do is obviously the foam that I'm using is quite a soft upholstery foam, and we're using it because it deforms very easily, and that's kind of why I'm using it. But that's also one of the problems is that you've cut your shape and you can very easily pull it out of shape. So when you're pushing down on the edge that you're sticking, try to push down. Don't push and stretch it like that. Just try and push straight down. Okay, so as you can see, it's quite a quick process. Okay, so you're not seeing that much from over there, but once I start on this edge, then you'll see the application of the technique. It won't take long. So each one of the pins is approximately 6 or 8 millimeters apart, or a quarter of an inch. But what I'm really using more than the width is how much each pin is able to hold. So in between each pin, the foam is pretty much straight if you're doing it right. If the pins are too far apart, then you'll start to get a bunch, and really you want the edge of your foam to be nice and flat. Just move those off there because it's starting to tilt up because we're pushing the edge down. Which is also a good reason to have lots of pins, because then you're not having to be too precious about where an exact number of pins go, because I won't show it to you, but there's literally pins all over the floor in here, because I've been that tuned into how long I've got to work with until things become too dry. So if a pin goes on the floor, it goes on the floor, and I'm not too concerned about that. So what you may have noticed that I'm doing with my hand is I'm sort of crawling up the edge of this with my hand, and I'm just pressing, holding the foam that I've previously pressed down with my thumb, and using my index finger to sort of crawl up the foam, and then pushing the pin just behind my finger and then press it down. Get out some more pins. More pins, which is why it's an excellent idea to literally have far in excess of what you think you're actually going to need. In terms of sort of pins per edge, there's about 5 or 6 pins in an inch, so you can either work out the edges that are involved and times that by the number of pins and buy them appropriately, or just buy a job lot of a few hundred or a few thousand pins, because some will get lost, some of them won't be perfect, some of them will get bent, and some of them irritatingly come without a point. And I've tried a couple of techniques and always came back to pins, because I originally tried to stitch this or just use an adhesive, and I didn't have very good results with that. So we have now stuck down that edge, and it took about 5 or 10 minutes, and now what I'm going to do is stick down the rest of the edges. What you'll see here is I've drawn where this shape needs to be stuck to. Because the foam warps, if you've not got this kind of thing stretched out, sketched out, then you'll get quite a bit of warp. And in terms of key pieces like the chest, where there's a higher degree of symmetry between left and right, you really need these kind of lines as a guide, so you know that you're still working on template. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to stick and pin these edges, and then once they're down, then we're going to work on these inner details. So again, I take my applicator and I just draw around well, and I smear latex on the edge of the shape. I'm going to start with the pectoral and then work down. So what I'm going to do is stick all the way around here by smearing it all along the edge. Which again, once an edge has had latex applied to it, then when you press it down, the latex that's on the edge will squidge and spread further into the foam, which will enable you to hold it in place, and that's what makes it dry in the pressed shape. So just going around the edge, just smearing it on. Just apply some to this bottom layer of foam, because that's what it's going to be sticking to as well. And now I'm going to run it down this edge here, which is an internal sort of bit which will border the edge of this. I could have just left the pectoral and the abs as part of the same piece of foam, but with them both are being cut, that means I'll get a nice deep edge too clearly defined between the two muscle groups. Just a bit more around here because it doesn't look particularly that well coated. Bit more there. Okay, so another tip is also remember to put the top back on your latex, which stops it from getting a very awkward skin on it. Okay, so I'm going to start to pin here and then work around that way and then work back this way. I don't think it really matters where you do pin, but if you start here, obviously it means that you won't have to constantly hold it down, and instead you can focus more on the edge. Okay, so let's get out some pins. And okay, so here's the technique which you probably didn't see when I was working on this side. Is you push the edge down with 2 fingers, yeah, and you put in a pin so it's quite close to the edge there, and then push down, and then again in about 4 or 5 millimeters time and a push down, and just carry on holding it down and just working along the edge, pinning as you go. And also, depending on the temperature that's in the room, just give it a very quick blast with the hair dryer, just to start the curing process, curing, drying, etc. Okay, so just working along, pressing down and pinning. Again, you're trying to just push straight down as much as possible rather than push down and press in one direction or another, because you don't want it to warp. You'll want it to warp and deform and be flexible as part of your outfit and your costume so that you can move around, but in order for it to work, at this stage, you need it as close to your template shape as possible. Corners are quite tricky, but just don't be tempted to sort of stretch it. Always push down, and I'm kind of going on about that because there's more than a few costume pieces that haven't fit because I've smeared the foam and spread it rather than push straight down on it. I had to skip ahead a bit because the power on the camera went, so all I did was I carried on and just completed the rest of this seam. So that's the outline done, so it's now time to work on the inner lines. So all I'm gonna do is do the same process, but this time I'm not working with an edge, I'm working on an internal line, and this is a bit different because you can't get the latex to go right down to the bottom, so you've got to use a bit more latex and a slightly different process, which I'll show you. First thing that I'm going to do is work on these long lines here, and then do the smaller joined up lines afterwards. So let's get started. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm just putting the latex onto the line that I drew, and I'm doing that reasonably heavy because it's got to sink down as far into the foam as possible. And what I'm going to do to help that along is, once it's on the line where I want it, I'm going to press it down just so it permeates deeper. So this is the clip I showed you earlier on, it can be anything, just so long as it's flat and it's not going to absorb the latex. So just pushing that down, just so the latex goes down in to the foam, and adding on some more. And then once this is on, it's going to push it down again. So just push it down again, just to get that deep into the foam, so that when the pin goes in, it will set quite a deep channel in the foam. And just add a third lot. Okay, and just press that down one last time. Give it a very quick blast with the hair dryer. So dry out the top bit, then start with the pins. Very slightly different technique now, because now we need to hold the foam down on both sides. So hold the foam down, pin, work along, hold down, pin. Just carry on working along the line. And you can see that even though there's a greater amount of pressure on the pins because of the foam being on both sides, it's managing to hold it down, so we get the nicely defined line in between the muscle. And we'll just flood in one more layer of glue, just to get a nice deep bond between the different layers of foam. Because when we take out the pins, we want the foam to pretty much stay as deep as that. It won't stay totally as deep as that, but more or less. Okay, so now moving along to the next line. Again, we're just going to flood on this. This is where the edge of the tool comes in real handy, because it coats the line with a degree of accuracy. Though obviously you want it quite thick so that once it's pushed down it holds a shape. So that's one layer on. Push it into the foam. Put on a second one. Push that in. I'll just do that again. Now we press down on both sides and pin. So now that bit's pinned, we'll just flood on some extra just like we did on the previous one. We'll move on to the next one. Clean the old latex off that and push the liquid down into the foam. Now add some more. get out some more pins. The approximate amount that we think we're going to need about 20 or 30, and start the pressing process again. Pushing down on both sides and working along, leaving a gap of about 1/4 inch or 5 or 6 mil in between each pin. The more pins you put in, the more it'll press down the foam, but of course you've got to take the pins out, so I try not to use more than what I need. Okay, so the foam's popped up past a pin there, so all that we're going to do is just put in another one and just push it down, and we can retrieve the pin afterwards. Now that that line's done, just draw it down again in latex. Now move on to the last horizontal line. Now pressing the pins. Now we're going to work on these smaller lines. And you'll notice that the more detail that you add into the foam in terms of areas that are pressed in, that the flatter it goes, which is why the pectoral looks like it's got more foam in it than the abs, but they're both the same depth in terms of the thickness of foam. It's just that because of the detail in the abs, it's pushing the foam down further or holding it down further. Okay, so just pressing these last bits. Okay, so that's all the bits pinned that we're actually going to pin. So all that I'm going to do now is just go around all of the edges and just add in a bit more latex just to make the bond that bit stronger, because obviously all of these edges aren't going to have to put up with an awful lot of strain, but who knows what positions you're going to want to pose in when you get into your costume, because you're going to be doing twists and sort of arms above your head and that kind of things, so you want to be reasonably sure that your seams aren't going to pop. So all I'm going to do now is just literally go around all of my edges, just flooding in latex again. So all in all, each part of the costume has got about, well, each one of these channels has got up to 4 layers of latex in it, which when the liquid goes into the pores in the foam and it dries in there and it holds it in position, that's really strong enough for sort of wear and tear that the costume will get whilst you're moving around in it. Of course, it will still pull apart if you're actively trying to pull it apart, but the natural stresses and strains of moving around should be okay. So just literally going down all of the channels again, and around the edges. This layer, however, is more of a precaution than anything else. So if I look like I'm skipping any part of it, it's not intentional, it's just an oversight. And if you notice any pins have popped up, just bang in another one. Make sure it's all held down. And there and one there. Just flood in this lower abdominal. Then do the top of the pec and this seam here, and then just go around and press it all in to make sure that it's well absorbed into the foam. Let's do the top of the pec. Okay, so now that that extra bit of latex is on, just going to now just press down all the way along all of the edges, which will just work in that bit of latex, and also make sure that if any pins have risen up a bit, that we're pushing them back down. Because as the latex starts to set, it'll get a stronger and stronger grip on those pins. So just really tracing the outline, just pushing down with the thimble. Really making sure that the glue permeates into the foam where I want it to, so it holds it in shape. Just tie in a couple more pins here where it might have slipped out. Okay, and that is pretty much it. Now you can either leave it to dry, and it'll be a couple of hours depending on the temperature of the room until it's dry on the surface and also dry on the inside, or you can speed it along a bit with a hair dryer. The intention there isn't to dry off the whole thing, it's just to start the process, because once the process is started, it tends to be quite quick. Okay, and that's it. If you've got any questions, you can contact me on the details below, or subscribe to the channel and receive updates on additional tutorials as I flesh out the rest of the outfit.